I've been challenged by a young friend of mine who I really dearly love and support, and he really was challenging me in a tweet when I wrote an article critical of black Americans who are getting all upset and talking about white privilege and racial animosity and racial discrimination. A lot of them are saying, well, a lot of the problems that black Americans are facing today are because of past slavery discrimination and these kind of issues. And I took issue with that, and he challenged me and said, Bob, we got to talk. So this is my opportunity to speak not only to him, but other young people who may be struggling with what are our priorities? What should we be doing as a people? Is our condition of life defined by white American racism and police brutality? We hear this all day, every day. A bunch of middle-class blacks from our universities are leading demonstrations and saying that the problems that we're facing is primarily caused by white people. Stop. That is not our problem. Racial discrimination may be a problem, but is not the most critical problems that we're facing today. If that were the case, between 1930 and 1940, when racial discrimination was embedded in law, when we had no black political figures, when we had no people in law enforcement, the family formation rate, or marriage rate in black community was higher than it was in the white community. Elderly people, elderly black people could walk in places like Southeast Washington and other low-income black neighborhoods without fear of being mugged by their grandchildren. And so conditions of race have never defined us as a people. Those are challenges that are external, but internal. And so the reason that I challenged my young friend is that it is important to recognize that the destiny of black people is not determined by what white people do or do not do. It is in our own hands. White people are not in our communities mugging one another. White people are not in our community. It is our values that determine our condition in life, not what some oppressor has done. For instance, there's a lot about Frederick Douglass. He was a slave, born a slave. At 16 years old, he was beaten by his slave master every week. He said he had whelps on his back as large as his fingers. And yet Frederick Douglass said, even faced with those kind of conditions, he was a man that became a slave, but his condition changed when that slave became a man, which means that even under oppressive conditions like that, it's your own attitude and values determine what you do with those conditions. Every Christmas, they gave slaves off. And what the slave master tried to do is they gave them liquor to drink, rum. And some of them even had the slaves compete with one another about who can drink the most. But Frederick Douglass said, because the slave master wanted his slaves to define freedom as freedom from responsibility, so at the end of the holiday, so-called holiday, they would be happy to go back to the fields, because being a slave to a man is no different than being a slave to rum. But there were other blacks like Frederick Douglass who used that time in a different way. They visited family members, they took recreation, and they used the time to pray. And these are the people who thrived, and then once they escaped to freedom, some of them became famous like Frederick Douglass. And so Frederick Douglass says that having morality, having a sense of your own value, even in the face of slavery, defines who and what you are as a person. So if Frederick Douglass was able to conform to some values, what they call middle-class values, of hard work, of self-sacrifice, if people in the face of slavery can embrace these values and use them to come out and become an international figure, then certainly those values that he enabled him to survive and thrive are useful for us to do today.